In this video, I'm going to talk about the secrets behind the augury future casting, such as Ching, Astrology, tarot card, and so forth. After many of you studying I Ching, you learn how to throw some coins and do some future casting. You will ask, well, how does it all work? Why does throwing a few coins actually enables some inspirations about what's going to happen in the future? How does that really work? Well, that's the information I'm going to present in this video. And my presentation is actually titled From Double Slit Experiment to the Relationship Between Physics and Faith. And that one sentence I consider encompass the core behind the secrets behind the augury and future casting. I'm going to recap double slit experiment a little bit for those of you who are not familiar. And so basically, double slit experiment like this is a very famous physics experiment that first conducted nearly 100 years ago. You have electron guns shooting electrons through a screen with two thin slits. So electrons passing through these slits and then projected onto a observation screen back here. And if the electrons are particles, they should form two lines, basically corresponding to electrons passing through the upper slit and the lower slit. But it didn't. It produced multiple lines like this, which is a typical characteristics of wave behavior, which results in interference pattern. If I put a particle detector behind this screen, which will enable me to detect which slit did each electrons come through, either on the upper slit or the lower slit. If I have such detector, one behind each slit, and behind the detector I have a data line that connect to some kind of recording device. Here it's called tape, but nowadays we'll probably use a laptop PC or whatever. But we are recording the exact moment where the electrons are passing through. If I do that, the interference pattern disappears and the two single line exist. And that basically is telling us the electrons passing through the slits behaves like particles. And while original experiment, the electrons behaves like waves. So I leave the detectors on. I just leave the detectors turned on, but I turn off the recording device. It could be the data line, Ethernet line with a PC that's connected. If I just turn off the recording device, the experimental results become multiple lines again, which means it turned back to be a wave. There got to be some kind of mechanism behind this phenomena where I turn on the recording device and then it will becomes particles. If I turn it off, and you'll behave like waves. There are many school of thoughts to explain why the phenomenon behaved the way it was. Whatever that mechanism is, we trust there is a mechanism that results in the double split DSC results. Even though we don't understand what that mechanism is completely, not understanding the mechanism is not a sufficient reason to deny some unknown mechanism exists. I think everybody agrees with what's being claimed here. And just for reference, you can Google or Wiki at your spare leisure. There are four main school of thought to explain why the DSC results was what it was. And there are Copenhagen interpretation, de Broglie-Bohm theory, which is also called pilot wave theory. There are multiverse interpretation and the cubism interpretation. So I'm not going to go into detail. I'm just saying there was this famous experiment, and the mere observation can affect the experimental results. So we trust there's a mechanism, even though we don't understand what it was. Okay. Before we get to the main topic, there's still one more subtopic I need to cover, which is Einstein's special theory of relativity. It was a thought experiment it goes like this. If at another planet that's many light years away from Earth, on that planet there are beings that can fly airplanes. And here I drew a hippo and then another pilot who can fly different airplanes. Now, if there's a mechanism, suppose there's a mechanism for the beings on this remote planet to observe what's happening on Earth, maybe using some kind of a quantum entanglement device that they can actually observe what's happening on this person A who's sitting on the park bench and typing on his laptop. Suppose there is a way for these remote beings to observe the Earth person A, and if the hippo here, he flies the airplane away from the Earth, what the hippo observes as person A was actually not the person A right now. It's actually a person A in the past. And in this case, in this pilot, if the pilot flies the airplane toward Earth and he's observing person A on the park bench, he's actually not observing the person A right now. He's observing a person A in the future. And from this thought experiment, one can realize that whether the person A is right now or in the past or in the future is really actually dependent on the conscious choice of the pilots. And by their conscious decision, they can observe either the past person A or the future person A. What this model is telling us is that, past, present, and future are illusions because they all exist. They all coexist. So what's the significance of coexisting past, present, and future? Well, the universe is most likely not a singular objective physical reality that most people feel like. Also, there is no reason to deny multiple versions of reality exist. And in this particular case, there's a reality of now and reality of an hour ago, and there's a reality of 1 hour in the future. They are all realities. There's no reason to deny multiple versions of realities exist, even if you cannot consciously distinguish it. So the double slit experiment phenomenon and the coexistence of past, present, and future are two foundations we need to discuss the mechanism of future casting. So let's get into that. So to describe that same double slit experiment, we can describe the experiment in this way. The particles go through a mechanism called double slit experiment, and the screen shows two lines. So that's what we have here. Particles go through two screens. We know it's particles because my detector here said it's particles, so they have two lines. That's how I describe the system. Or in another way, describing the same thing, electron gun are the input, provided input, and the particle verifying device in the double slit experiment, and we will show with the observation screen showing two lines, which indicating a particle behavior. But same electron gun input, if I have no particle verification device at the double slit experiment, which is this case, I turn off the recording device even though the detectors are on, but electron guns still shooting the particles through the two slit, then I will have multiple lines. So particle detector plus recording device made us trust the input are particles. That's the whole takeaway. And even though it's same electron gun output, if we cannot trust the input are particles, then the result is something else. Okay, let's phrase the description another way, like this. We have something that's happening right now. It goes through some kind of trusted mechanism, then it will produce some predicted future will happen. Or we have some kind of observable now snapshot, and we have that now going through some trusted mechanism that can predict the future. And the predicted future snapshot actually will happen because we trust it. There's some kind of mechanism that we shove the now through, and some kind of snapshot will happen in the future that will ultimately occur. And on the contrary, if I shove the same now snapshot into some untrusted prediction system, future can be any future version are possible. No predictability. I think so far so far so good. They are pretty self-explanatory. But I look at this situation as an engineer. I would think, well, how do I design a system that can predict the future? I want to avoid the situation in case 3 here, and I will focus on the situation of case 2. How do I enhance the case 2 or build my mechanism around this case 2 where the mechanism is trusted and some kind of input can be well defined and then some kind of output can be well defined. So my input criteria are future is observable, and we have a trusted mechanism that can predict the future, and then we go through the trusted mechanism, then one of the predicted future universe version will happen. I put one of that. I will elaborate on that in the future charts. So that's the yellow, within the yellow line is the system I'm going to design if I want some kind of system that can predict the future. So how do I establish a trust in such a system? How do I get this trusted mechanism? How do I build this? Well, we trust the double slit experiment result, even though we don't know how it works. Because, why? Experimentally, it's repeatable. You can do it, I can do it, some physicists 100 years ago can do it, so it's repeatable. And another reason is the results can be characterized statistically. I put the asterisk here because that DSE result is actually wave function that's predicted by the Schrodinger's equation. So the third characteristic of DSE is input-output can be specifically and systematically defined. That means in the experiment, the electron gun is well defined, the screens are well defined, the timing of electron guns are well defined. Everything is well defined. So that's what makes it repeatable. Oh, so I have these criteria, so I trust it, even though we don't know how it works. So it's okay if I don't know how it works, as long as I can trust it. Secondly, if past, present, future coexist, then there is no reason to deny that a mechanism that can peek into the future is feasible. Even though I don't know how to build a machine that can peek into the future version of the universe, but I cannot deny such mechanism never will exist. It's never feasible. That's what this second point is saying. So if I want to establish trust, I will have these two criteria. I must possess these two criteria. So if we trust something that even though we don't know how it works, well, how about I Ching augury, numerology, astrology, Holy Spirit, Bible, even the big data and quantum computing? We trust them. If we trust these mechanisms, even though we don't know how it works, then it works. Secondly, trust and we know how it works. If we trust something and we know how it works, then it works even better. So the whole key criteria is the trust. It's the so-called trusted mechanism. Once you trust a mechanism, whatever with its very specific input, then you will be able to predict the output as a version of the future. Okay, so let me recap this very important concept. As long as you have a trusted mechanism where your trust was obtained by repeatable experiment, where results can be characterized statistically and input-output can be specifically, systematically defined, if you attain the trust through those criteria, that's called a trusted system, then you can have some current input of now, and you will have some kind of capability to predict the future. So if your head still cannot wrap around this idea at this time, it's okay. It takes a while for these concepts to sink in. But we want to say that we introduce this core understanding to those who want to attain future prediction capabilities. If one's core belief is that reality must be singular and must be objective, then there's no point studying any further. He or she will not be able to predict the future. And that's what we described earlier. If you choose to have untrusted prediction mechanism, you just don't believe anything that can help you predict the future, okay, you will not predict the future. Future versions, all versions are possible. Some frequently asked questions I will answer right here. One is, well, how can future already exist? Well, for this topic, I recommend you Google for Brian Greene's video on spatial theory of relativity. That video was very well explained in layman's terms, so very easy to understand. Another question is, if future can be predicted, what is the role of my conscious choice then? My answer to that is this. Many of the prediction mechanisms actually predict multiple outcomes, and some of them, the outcomes are characterized statistically, just like the output of the quantum computing or output of the big data. And in fact, in our own research team, we quantize and statistical characterization for I Ching's algorithm. I Ching's output can also be done that way. So you have a choice of which path to go, because there are multiple outcomes that's really dependent on your upcoming conscious choices. Okay, another question is, how can you compare AI, big data, quantum computing with something like I Ching or astrology? We have mentioned earlier, you don't have to know how it works, as long as you can attain that trust, and that trust is attained by repeatable experiment, statistical characterization of the results, and clear input and output. So if you can do that with astrology, it works just as well as quantum computing. So specifically, we can quantize any systematic algorithm method. Use such quantized model to characterize and categorize the reality of interest, and then compiles lots and lots of input and output measurement data. If you use big data techniques to filter through this measurement data and analyze your database, you will develop an input-output relationship that enables you some kind of a predictability. So if you do characterize everything quantitatively, and the AI will give you algorithm. Even though your data come from a bunch of coin throw in your I Ching algorithm or some kind of astrology alignment, you can, as long as you have enough data to characterize the events, the previous input and output, and so some kind of input occur, you will be able to predict some future. So by this time, you should see there's a lot of similarity between any kind of scientific prediction system versus so-called these astrology or I Ching or traditional algorithm method. So if you're interested in this topic, you can experiment with these predictability tools such as I Ching reading when you are alone or starting with small daily items, and you will be enlightened. The bottom line is, future can be influenced by our consciousness, but our belief system is so deeply entrenched in our mind that many of the outcomes are relatively predictable. And that's how we build a system to predict the future.